A US military website has reported that Moscow has asked Indonesia to allow Russian long-range aircraft to be based in Papua. The Defence Minister has confirmed Australia has been in contact with Indonesia to work out if Russia has asked to base the aircraft at Indonesia's Air Force base there. Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts is in Parliament House for us. Hi there, Stephen. So what do we know about this request?
Well, the truth is right now we know very little for certain, Mel. What we do know is that the US military website Jane's, which is quite authoritative, has reported that it's got documents which prove that Russia has lodged an official request with Jakarta to give it permission to use an Air Force base in Papua province, that's in the far east of Indonesia, of course, not far from Papua New Guinea, to use that military base to deploy and base its long-range aircraft. Now, to be clear, Indonesia, by all accounts, has not yet responded to this reported request, but unsurprisingly, the prospect of both of Russia, a country which remains very hostile to Australia and which has been very destructive in the international scene over the last few years, the prospect of them hosting long-range aircraft so close to Australia's northern approaches is one that would be deeply troubling to the Australian government. So both the Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, and the Defence Minister, Richard Marles, were pressed about this on the campaign trail this afternoon. Both of them seem to indicate that Australia had not been able to confirm yet either way whether this reported request had in fact been lodged, but they said senior Australian officials had been in touch with their counterparts in Jakarta to try and clarify exactly what the request was, when it was made, and how Indonesia was likely to respond. Let's take a listen to both the Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, and the Defence Minister, Richard Marles, speaking about this earlier today.
I'm aware of the reports and I can be clear that we as a government have reached out to confirm those reports and to understand whether or not those reports are accurate and what the status of those requests from Russia are. As you know, Russia is engaging in an illegal and immoral war against Ukraine. And you would know that the Australian government has imposed a great many sanctions on Russia and continues to provide both military and humanitarian support.
We have a very close relationship with Indonesia. We have a growing defence relationship with Indonesia. We have already been engaged with Indonesia on this request. I'd note that at this point Indonesia has not responded to this request. We will keep engaging with Indonesia in a way which befits a very close friend and a very close friendship between our two countries. We have been very focused on developing our bilateral relationship with Indonesia, including our bilateral defence relationship with Indonesia. Last year, we signed a defence cooperation agreement with Indonesia, which really is the deepest level defence agreement we've ever had with Indonesia. And we are seeing increasing cooperation between Australia and Indonesia at a defence level, and I expect all of that to continue. In respect of this particular issue, we are already engaging with Indonesia at a senior level and will continue to do so about the request.
So, Stephen, has there been any response from Indonesia?
Not really at this stage. All of the government departments that the ABC has contacted in Jakarta have simply said they have no information at this stage, and some people in the broader government bureaucracy don't seem to be aware of this reported request whatsoever. That in itself is not necessarily a tell of anything, because sometimes requests like this, particularly ones that are particularly sensitive, are pretty tightly held. In other words, they don't get seen by many people. In Jakarta, it may be that only senior officials, officers and politicians are aware of this request. That's assuming that it has in fact been lodged. But obviously the fact that you've now got senior representations from Australia, from officials, asking for more information, and the fact you've had the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, the Defence Minister, all wading into this issue publicly here in Australia, it's likely to be a bit of a spur in the Indonesian system. I imagine we will get something a little bit more definitive down the track. Those people I've spoken to, Mel, in Jakarta already, who don't themselves have any direct knowledge of what's happening here, say privately that that they don't believe that it's likely that Indonesia would grant this request. They say it would be very disruptive and it would go against the grain of Indonesia's foreign policy principles. So they're playing down the chances of Indonesia ever saying yes to this. But it is just worth noting that in some ways Moscow and Jakarta have drawn closer since Prabowo took power. Last year, we've seen, for example, joint military drills between the two, or joint naval drills, rather, in November last year. We've seen quite a bit of high-level contact. You've seen senior Russian officials visiting Jakarta just a couple of months ago. So all of this means that Australia will want to get a pretty cast-iron assurance from Jakarta pretty quickly that this request, assuming it has in fact been lodged, that this request will get very short shrift from the government in Indonesia.
And this is, of course, quickly becoming a campaign issue.
Yeah, unsurprisingly, both the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, and the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, have both fielded questions on this, quite a few questions in the Prime Minister's case. The opposition leader, Peter Dutton, says that it would be a very, very serious indictment of the Albanese government if it was taken unawares by this report. He said it would be a catastrophic failure of diplomacy if Australia wasn't aware of this request before it was broken by the Jane's newsletter when it came out earlier today. As for Anthony Albanese, he says it's time to remain calm. He says he wants to try and engage diplomatically on this issue, and he doesn't want to engage in speculation about what may or may not be true, simply saying that Australian officials have reached out to try and clarify exactly what's going on. Let's take a listen to what both leaders had to say.
This would be a catastrophic failure of diplomatic relations if Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese didn't have forewarning about this before it was made public. This is a very, very troubling development and suggestion that somehow Russia would have some of their assets based in Indonesia, only a short distance from obviously the north of our country. We need to make sure that the government explains exactly what has happened here. Did the Prime Minister know about this before it was publicly announced by the President of Indonesia? And what is the government's response to it?
Well, what we're seeking is proper clarification. That's the way you deal with international relations. Making sure that you're not flying from the hip. What we didn't do when the United States made its decision on tariffs was question our defence relationship with the United States. It took John Howard to intervene, to point out to Peter Dutton that that wasn't appropriate. We'll respond in an appropriate way with our friends in Indonesia. We are seeking further information. We obviously do not want to see Russian influence in our region.
So obviously, Mel, this story probably has a fair way to run, and I suspect it might, at least to a degree, shape the campaign over the next couple of days at least.
No doubt a lot more to come on this one. Stephen Jedget's in Canberra there for us. Thank you.